Hey folks, it's Miss Sinclair for AP World History Modern. Today we are going to be starting our lectures on Unit 3. Unit 3 looks at land empires in particular, and we are going to start this unit by talking about the Ottoman Empire. We introduced the Ottomans at the end of last unit. However, it is now time to really dig into them. The picture you see on the slide there is the Blue Mosque, which I've actually been to in Istanbul, and it is just as beautiful as that picture makes it seem. So, what luxury goods are being traded globally at this time? I want you to think back. The last unit, if you remember, was all about trade and interrelationship. So what's being traded? What's actually passing from place to place? Today, we are starting to learn about the Ottomans. There are going to be multiple parts to this 3.1 objective. So, the AP course curriculum only has like 3 subsections for this entire unit. So, that's why each subsection is like 3.1A, 3.1B. It's because there's a lot to talk about, but they only have a few topics clarified. So our objective for today is you'll be able to explain how and why the Ottoman Empire developed and expanded. So, in general, we're going to be spending the next couple lectures looking at these Muslim empires in the Middle East and around the Indian Ocean. So we refer to these as the Gunpowder Empires. So, a couple of things to think about in context. For a while, you had this unified Muslim world under the Abbasids, right? You had stretching from Spain across North Africa into Persia, a single unified Muslim identity. But of course, the Mongols are going to destroy Muslim unity in the 13th century when they conquer the Abbasids. So, a couple centuries later, we are going to see 3 new Muslim empires emerge in a revitalization of Islamic civilization. So these 3 empires are hearkening back to sort of the golden age of the Abbasids, this intellectual, artistic vibrancy, the way they're going to dominate political and economic life in the region. So you definitely need to know these 3. It's the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughal Empire. So the Ottomans are the most dominant and long-lasting of the 3. They are going to be Sunni Muslim. They are going to really claim the role of caliph, of protector of Islam, and they're actually going to be around until the 20th century. They collapse with World War I. So they're around for a long time. The Safavids are going to be in what's modern-day Iran, but we know as the territory of Persia. They're going to be around for about 200 years, and they are our first real Shia empire. And then in northern India, coming out of the Timurid Empire, you're going to have the Mughals. The Mughals are not the first Muslim empire in India, right? We had the Delhi Sultanate already. However, they are going to unify India in a way that really hasn't been seen in a really long time. So the AP really likes you to be able to compare and contrast these empires. You're going to see a lot of AP prompts and questions that are asking you to think about these 3 empires together. How are they similar and how are they different? So I think it's really helpful to outline these. So similarities. All 3 of these empires are going to originate from Turkish nomadic cultures. So when I say Turkish or Turkic, I don't want you to think just the Anatolian Peninsula. Really, I want you to think Central Asia, right? The Mongols are technically like a Turkic nomadic group. So all three empires are going to originate out of these nomadic groups from Central Asia. They are all going to be incredibly dominant through the use of the military and political power, and they are all going to make highly effective use of gunpowder. This is why they're called the Gunpowder Empires. It is in these three states we have what is known as sort of the Islamic Renaissance, this rebirth of Islamic culture and art. We see that they will spread Islam to new territories, and a lot of zeal, a lot of desire for pure Islam and Orthodox Islam. You see that they will all be ruled by absolute monarchs, which that's going to be a big concept for this unit in general, absolutism. And their economy will all be based on agriculture. So you have these agrarian populations that are going to make up your tax base. So what makes them so different? Well, the Mughals are going to be the minority, right? The majority of the people living in the Indian subcontinent will be Hindu. So you have this Muslim minority ruling a Hindu majority. So that's going to create a lot of tensions between these two populations. In Persia, with the Safavids, you're going to see that they are going to rule mostly Muslims, but the fact that they're Shia is going to put them at odds with the Ottomans on the west and the Mughals on the east. And then, of course, you have the Ottomans. The Ottomans will be ruling a mixture of Muslims and Christians, and they have their own challenges with ruling these two populations, but also with this very hostile Christian Europe to the west and a hostile Shia neighbor to the east in the Safavids. So let's start by talking about the Ottoman. Well, why are we going to see them really emerge and really be dominant? Well, the Ottoman Empire, where's my definition? Okay. The Ottoman Empire, which you actually defined last unit, but the Ottoman Empire is a Islamic state founded by Osman, O-S-M-A-N, in northern Anatolia around 1300. And it will be governed from Istanbul after 1453 and until 1922. So why is the Ottoman going to become this hugely dominant empire? I mean, look at this map, right? It's going to expand beyond the edge of this map. So why are they going to grow to be so large and so hugely influential? Well, one thing is the shrewdness of the rulers, of Osman and the other descendants. They are going to be highly thoughtful, and the political court of the Ottomans is one where only the shrewd survive. Think like Game of Thrones level politics and spying and assassination kind of thing. I'll tell you a couple stories once we get into it a little bit. The other thing that will really help is their geography. So they are going to control a really strategic link between Europe and Asia on the Dardanelles Strait. So where are the Dardanelles? That is going to be right here. It's going to be this little spot right by Istanbul, formerly known as Constantinople. Yes, we all know the song. So because of their location in general, controlling the Dardanelles, but also controlling access to the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, it means they are this linchpin for trade. If you want to get your goods from the Indian Ocean to Europe or vice versa, you have to do business with the Ottomans. And Venice is really going to be the main city in Europe that will do business with the Ottomans, for good and ill. We also see that they are going to have a highly effective military. So it will take advantage of the traditional cavalry of the nomads of Central Asia, as well as new technology like gunpowder. So let's do a quick timeline. All these dates are not super important. I just want you, really what's important here is when the empire really gets going in 1453. So 1453 is really like the date to know. But if we're thinking broadly about the territory, in 1258, the Abbasids fall to the Mongols. You have, for about a century, Mongols ruling out of Baghdad, right, the Ilkhanate. Meanwhile, you have Osman founding the Ottoman Empire around 1300 and beginning to conquer land, build his territory. So all of this time, he's trying, and his descendants are trying to conquer Constantinople. Remember, this territory had been controlled by the Byzantines, but they were old and weak at this time. So they are unable to conquer Constantinople until 1453. There's a lot of dates that you don't need to know for world history. You will hear me say generally, if you just know the centuries, oh, the Ottomans were around from the 14th to the 20th centuries. Like, that's good enough. Not 1453. 1453 is a turning point. So, with 1453, Mehmed II is going to conquer Constantinople. Mehmed II is a fascinating guy. You see, it is around, he is incredibly smart. If you haven't read that book, 1453, on the conquering of Constantinople, I highly recommend it. I know it seems super weird to be like, oh my gosh, this history book, this nonfiction book is so good. But I was very stressed while reading it. I'm a history teacher, right? I know how the story ends. Constantinople falls. The Ottomans win. But I was like on the edge of my seat. I couldn't put it down. I was like, what's going to happen next? So one of the things you learn about Mehmed II is he is incredibly smart. He is going to be able to utilize the janissaries and all of the effective warriors to target Constantinople's weak points. Our next big sultan to know, though, you have Osman, who founds it, Mehmed II, who conquers Constantinople, and who renames it Istanbul. Istanbul was actually just kind of like a misunderstanding of Greek for like the city across the water, but Istanbul stuck. The third sultan to know is going to really be Suleiman the Magnificent. He is like the one to remember. Suleiman with his giant onion hat, onion turban. So it is going to be under Suleiman the Magnificent that you have the sort of Ottoman golden age. He's our most illustrious sultan, and he will significantly expand the empire into Europe. This is definitely the height of Ottoman power. So one of the things I guess I didn't fully appreciate until I read that book on Queen Isabella was how dominant the Ottomans were. The Ottomans during the Renaissance, the Ottomans during the Middle Ages, was the major world superpower in the region. Right? China's always doing its own thing, but remember, during the Ming Dynasty, they're super isolationist. They have no desire to mess with anyone else. So who's the biggest power on the global stage? It's going to be the Ottoman Empire, not Europe, certainly not like Spain or the Italian city-states. No. And with the conquering of Constantinople, and thus sort of the fall of the starting point of like Christianity and all that jazz, there is a huge fear in Europe, in the Mediterranean, that the Ottomans will just like gather a navy and sail over and conquer the Italian peninsula, and then reconquer Spain. Remember, in 1492, Isabella and Ferdinand had just completed the Reconquista, so their control of the Iberian Peninsula is very shaky. And there are a lot of Muslim refugees in North Africa who had fled Spain, who would be happy to team up with the Ottomans to reconquer it. So Western Europe lives in terror of the Ottoman Empire. But simultaneously, they desperately need the Ottomans because of the trade connections that the Ottoman Empire has with the rest of the world. So it's definitely a situation where you love them, you hate them, but you can't live without them. It is going to be Suleiman who adds the title of Caliph to the Sultan's sort of long list of titles. And it's under Suleiman that they really claim the legacy of the Abbasid Empire. He's going to seek to bring unity to the Islamic world and serve as the protector of the faith, right? So he's the one who is saying, yeah. Remember the Abbasids, remember the Umayyads, right? They were the caliphs, they were the political leader after Muhammad. Well, they're gone, and I'm the new guy on the block. I'm the direct successor to that political power. We see that Christians and Jews in the empire will still be allowed to practice their faith. Under Suleiman, the Ottomans are extremely Sunni and thus will be at odds with the Shia Safavids. But it is under Suleiman that we really see a buildup of the military and development of the arts. And we see an expansion of Islam. So, in 1580, this is going to be the territory occupied and controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Suleiman is going to rule from about 1520 to 1566. So this is a massive amount of territory. And look at this. I think this is the most interesting part. Look how much of Western Europe. I mean, they are on the steps of Vienna. See, it really is not that big of a jump to think, oh gosh, the Ottomans could very easily take Italy, Sicily, and Spain, right? Look how much of the territory they already surround. It wouldn't be a hard leap. Please watch this video. It's on Suleiman the Magnificent. Okay, let's talk about some of the central institutions of the Ottoman Empire. A big one is going to be the military, specifically the janissaries. This is a group of men you need to know for the Ottomans. So, the janissaries are infantry, originally from slave origin, who will be armed with firearms and constitute the elite of the Ottoman army from the 15th century until 1826. So, who are they? Well, the Ottomans really were focused a lot on warfare. They are doing battle with Western Europe, they're doing battle with the Safavids, and they wanted to create an elite class of warriors that were loyal to the Sultan only. So where do you get these men from? What they're going to do is they're going to go into Eastern Europe. They're going to go into the Balkans and start this selection process of devshirme. So what they do is they take young boys, like 7-year-olds, Christian boys, out of the Balkans, and then they would enslave them. So you go into the Balkans, you kidnap young Christian boys, you place them with Turkish families, you force them to learn Turkish, they often convert to Islam, and they are sent to the Sultan to be educated in Islam, military training, and generally the liberal arts. They're learning all kinds of stuff. So they are going to be an incredibly effective military force and one that is only loyal to the Sultan. In part because of brainwashing and in part because this is the community that they're actually going to grow up in. We do see instances, however, of people in the Balkans resenting this or even disabling, like injuring their sons to make it so they would not be taken. So they are slaves, technically, and originally Christians from Eastern Europe. The janissaries are going to control the artillery and the firearms, which are the most powerful components of the military. And ultimately, as time goes on, they will stop being a reform group and start to block reform as we enter the 19th century. So, before we jump over to the Navy, under Suleiman, we see this attempt to expand into Western Europe. The Holy Roman Empire, which is going to be made up of a lot of German states, is sort of over here in like Austria, Germany, and they are weakening because of internal struggles between German princes due to the Protestant Reformation, which we'll talk about later this unit. So he is going to be able to effectively conquer Hungary, and he's going to be like on the steps of Vienna like 3 times, but never quite conquers it. Now, if he had conquered Vienna, that really would have been a turning point, and it would have been easy entry to the rest of Western Europe. He might have gotten his navy in order, but ultimately he will refocus on the east and the south. He will never expand further west than basically Budapest. They do try to create a navy, but it's pretty terrible. You see that they don't really have, they're cavalrymen, right? They're from Central Asia. Not exactly comfortable on the seas. We see the same problem with the Mongols. So you have your navy full of like Turkish, Greek, Algerian, Tunisian sailors. The Ottoman Navy was really going to be powerful until the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, where basically they get their butts kicked by the Portuguese. So they are going to try to rebuild their fleet, but it's just never really going to be able to catch up. And they're going to fall behind in technology. Just for the Navy. What about the Ottoman court? Well, the Ottoman court is going to be really governed by absolute monarchs. So an absolute monarch is when the king has complete control of everything. The king says, everyone cut off their beards, and everyone has to cut off their beards, that kind of thing. So we call the Ottoman kings sultans, but since it is such a large empire, you really need effective administration and tax collection across different areas. So this is going to require a large bureaucracy. So the first half of the Ottoman Empire, you have these absolute monarchs who are very smart and skilled at controlling the different religious and legal factions. Later in the Ottoman Empire, you start to see our standard cycle, right? Leaders more focused on luxury, on their wives, leaving the governing of the empire to viziers, and things start to break down as people start to get corrupt. So you do have the use of a grand vizier to help administer all of this. And it's really as the vizier gains power, the sultans lose power. And it's really just because the sultans are not interested in governing. They're interested in luxury. And their harems. We'll talk a little bit more about the harems in a little bit when we talk about women. But a harem is where they keep all of their wives. So Islamic principles of succession are very problematic. And the Sunni model in particular means it's unclear. What do I mean by that? Well, you don't have a clear system of primogeniture in Islamic culture. What is that? Primogeniture is when the eldest son is going to be the heir. We see that in Europe, right? Oh, too bad King Henry, didn't have a daughter first because his second son is way smarter than his first son, but the first son's going to be king. You don't have that in the Ottoman court. It's really kind of last man standing. And I really do mean last man standing. You hear stories coming out of the Ottoman court where one son invites all of his siblings, like all of his brothers, to this feast. And you have to remember, since you have harems, right, your dad has like 100 or more wives. So you have all these half-brothers. So he invites them all to a feast and just poisons everyone. And so you hear stories about them like just carrying the bodies out of this feast. Well, guess you know who's going to be king next. It's really, Mehmed II only barely survives the machinations of the court. And one of the big roles of women in the court is going to be to try and protect their sons from being murdered and also place them in line for the throne. So when I say like Game of Thrones level, people are assassinating each other, lying to each other, spying on each other, that had nothing compared to the intrigue of the Ottoman courts. The capital of the Ottoman Empire is going to be Istanbul, and they are really going to invest a lot into the city. So they're going to restore Constantinople and to try and make it beautiful, to try and make it kind of like it was at its height. I mean, Constantinople at the height of the Byzantine Empire had like golden domes and like people talked about like jeweled streets. Like it was just so luxurious. And it was a direct display of political power. Whenever you see kings building huge monuments, castles, beautiful architecture, it's a way to show off how rich and powerful they are, first and foremost. And then secondly, it's to serve the public. Sultans and administrators will start to build mansions, madrasas, religious schools, hospitals, rest houses, gardens. And the Hagia Sophia will be converted into a mosque at this time. And so all the beautiful mosaics will be plastered over because in Islam, you do not have human features present in your worship, right? That's idolatry. You have this grand bazaar, which is essentially a huge covered marketplace. You can still go there in Istanbul. I've been there. It's where the merchants and artisans would gather to sell their wares. Let's talk a little bit about Ottoman culture and before I jump into talking about Ottoman women, I want to briefly talk about the Ottomans and Christians, thinking about the Hagia Sophia. So, at first, first of all, you're always going to have a Christian minority in most Muslim countries at this time. But the Balkans, Eastern Europe, will be the territory that has a Christian majority. It's going to be about 80% Christian, even after Ottomans have ruled for like 50 years. So the Christians in the Balkans will originally really welcome the Ottoman rule because the Ottomans had lower taxes than the Christian rulers had. However, the use of devshirme, kidnapping of their sons, will sour that relationship a little bit. But in general, Eastern Orthodox and Armenian churches will be granted a lot of autonomy in regulating their own internal social, religious, educational, and charitable affairs. So Christians will be given a lot of autonomy in the Ottoman Empire, in the Balkan region in particular. But interestingly enough, throughout the empire, we will still see Christian and Jewish women using Muslim courts in cases of marriage and inheritance because the laws would be more favorable to them than in Jewish or Christian courts. So let's talk about women. One of the things we think about, do I have a picture of harems? No, I don't. Okay. One of the things we think about a lot with the Ottoman courts and women is, of course, the harem. So officially, an Ottoman Empire never got married, right? Because if an Ottoman emperor, a sultan got married, then his wife would be queen and have like equal power, and it adds all these complications. So officially, Ottoman sultans never married, but they had harems full of concubines, these official mistresses. This means he will always have a male heir, and that's helpful, right? In Europe, you're going to see lots of wars because, oh no, so-and-so, this king died, and he doesn't have any male heirs. He only had daughters, or his one son died. And so you have tons of wars in Europe between the Spanish and the French and the English and the French and the Spanish and like the Dutch over who's going to rule the throne because of complicated lines of succession. The Ottoman version means you definitely have someone available to be sultan after you. The question is who? You also see that because he doesn't have wives, you don't have messy conflicts over power like in Europe. You can't do this to that woman because she is the sister of the King of France. But the reason why they didn't get married is because in Islam, the religion says that wives should be treated in a certain way, and this would limit the sultan's power. Concubines don't have to be treated in any particular way. So, we see that over time, women in the Ottoman Empire will face legal and social disadvantages. As time goes on, women will lose more and more rights in the Ottoman Empire. They are unable to become educated or participate in politics. They had to be secluded or veiled. You see an increase in slave women, so essentially human trafficking, of women from the Caucasus region, so the Caucasus Mountains, or Sudan. The official census didn't even count women when you were counting up your population. And Orthodox Muslim reformers would seek to even restrict women's religious gatherings. However, elite wives and concubines exerted influence over sultans. But most women in the Ottoman Empire lived unenviable lives. They were completely subordinate to husbands and fathers, and many would be restricted to the harem. Like, oh, you're pretty at age 13. I'm taking you from your family. They can't do anything to stop me. I'm putting you in the harem, and you are never going to leave it for the rest of your life. And you have to have sex with the sultan. Even if you don't want to. He's going to rape you, and that's like the way it's going to go. And if you're lucky, he's going to like you, sleep with you a lot, and you are going to have a son and be able to make that son sultan next. So the most powerful woman in the country was the mother of the sultan. So that's your life goal as a woman in the harem, is to have a son and then to make him sultan. So palace politics revolved around making your son the heir. You have one woman who is going to have a lot of influence. Roxolana, the Hurrem Sultana. She's going to be the chief consort, so the favorite concubine of Suleiman the Magnificent. She's originally from Poland and was brought here in a slave raid, right? So they capture a bunch of people, bring them back to sell as slaves. They have a son together, and usually this means you get sent away. Okay, you've done your duty, you had a son, now get out of my sight. But instead, she convinces him to marry her. Now, this is very questionable. Like, it's not sure if they actually got married or she just said they got married. Either way, she convinces him to keep her around, and they have 6 kids together, which is pretty unheard of. She's going to use her power to become super educated and become one of Suleiman's main advisors, especially in Eastern Europe. So here is the Blue Mosque. This is one of the public works in Istanbul, one of the ways that they are going to try and beautify the city. Please watch this video on the janissaries. I can't remember where I got it from, but I'll include a link. And for our discussion question, where did the Ottomans expand into? What were the janissaries and how were they used? So, as the military evolves, as technology evolves, we see the use of more and more cannons and gunpowder and less cavalry. The economy becomes destabilized because of the influx of silver from the Americas, courtesy of the Spanish. This is going to cause massive inflation. They will pay the cavalry, not janissaries, in land, And so these soldiers would be able to collect taxes, but the government will limit how many taxes can be collected on the land. And so landowners will go bankrupt and the land will just return to the state. All of these unpaid cavalrymen will essentially cause revolts. And emergency taxes will be put in place to combat the revolts, but this will actually make things worse. We see that over time, sultans will spend more and more time in the harem instead of governing. Grand viziers will rule instead. The territory is simply too large to effectively govern, given the technological and communication of the day. The janissaries will start to take a larger role politically, and the positions will become hereditary. So instead of going in and kidnapping boys, you'll have, my father was a janissary, so I will be a janissary. So over time, we start to see the Ottoman Empire decline. The empire will last for over 600 years, during which the Ottomans will fight many rivals. They'll survive for so long in part because internal European rivalries will keep Europe from ever really focusing on the Ottomans. And we will see that throughout the coming centuries, the janissaries will act as a conservative and traditional force, resisting westernization and modernization. Ultimately, the empire will be too large to maintain, and they will be unable to expand against other Muslim and Christian groups. The effectiveness of the administration will be diminished as the bureaucracy becomes very corrupt, and local officials will begin to squeeze the peasants for taxes and services. So, this is what we've seen in a lot of different empires. The empire gets really big. The effective rulers who made it that way are gone. The new guys are more focused on luxury and women and doing drugs than they are actually governing, meaning control of the empire is going to fall into the hands of bureaucrats who are going to be corrupt and overtaxed the poor populations. This will cause peasant uprisings and the abandonment of land. Civil strife will increase. And yet we still see they're in a great location trade-wise. So they have increased trade through ports. And in fact, let's see, do I have that yet? Okay. From 1718 to 1730, about 12 years, you have what's known as the Tulip period. These are the last years of the Ottoman Sultan Ahmed III, during which European styles and attitudes will become really powerful in Istanbul. It will then actually lead to a janissary revolt. So you just have a general trend downhill after Suleiman for the most part. So basically 1650 onward, things are slowly declining towards the 20th century. So I can't remember if I had you watch this TED Ed when we talked about the Byzantine Empire. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. It's pretty interesting. Let's do a couple practice questions to finish up our day. So, a new 14th century Ottoman military elite was Christian. A new 14th century Ottoman military elite was Christian prisoners of war called the Devshirme system involved Okay, this is a long source, so you need to pause the video and watch it. Read it. Okay. Which of the following best supports Matty's argument? So which of the following best supports the author's argument? The success of the Ottoman Empire as discussed in the passage, was most directly a result of which of the following? For your summary, please explain how and why the Ottoman Empire developed and expanded. Remember, your goal is to ace these summaries, so answer the prompt, use evidence, and explain your evidence. These should be at least 5 sentences. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a great day.